The search. All of us seek peace and harmony because this is what we lack in our lives. We all want to be happy. We regard it as our right. Yet happiness is a goal we strive toward more often than attain. At times, we all experience dissatisfaction in life, agitation, irritation, disharmony, suffering. Even if at this moment we are free from such dissatisfactions, we can all remember a time when they afflicted us and can foresee a time when they may recur. Eventually, we all must face the suffering of death. Nor do our personal dissatisfaction remain limited to ourselves. Instead, we keep sharing our suffering with others. The atmosphere around each unhappy person becomes charged with agitation, so that all who enter that environment may also feel agitated and unhappy. In this way, individual tensions combine to create the tensions of society. This is the basic problem of life. Its unsatisfactory nature. Things happen that we do not want. Things that we want do not happen. And we are ignorant of how or why this process works, just as we are each ignorant of our own beginning and end. 25 centuries ago, in northern India, a man decided to investigate this problem, the problem of human suffering. After years of searching and trying various methods, he discovered a way to gain insight into the reality of his own nature and to experience true freedom from suffering. Having reached the highest goal of liberation, of release from misery and conflict, he devoted the rest of his life to helping others do as he had done, showing them the way to liberate themselves. This person, Siddhartha Gautama, known as the Buddha, the enlightened one, never claimed to be anything other than a man. Like all great teachers, he became the subject of legends, but no matter what marvelous stories were told of his past existence or his miraculous powers, still all accounts agree that he never claimed to be divine or to be divinely inspired. Whatever special qualities he had were preeminently human qualities that he had brought to perfection. Therefore, whatever he achieved is within the grasp of any human being who works as he did. The Buddha did not teach any religion or philosophy or system of belief. He called his teaching Dhamma. This is law, the law of nature. He had no interest in dogma or idle speculation. Instead, he offered a universal practical solution for a universal problem. Now, as before, he said, I teach about suffering and the eradication of suffering. He refused even to discuss anything which did not lead to liberation from misery. This teaching, he insisted, was not something that he had invented or that was divinely revealed to him. It was simply the truth, reality, which by his own efforts he had succeeded in discovering, as many people before him had done, as many people after him would do. He claimed no monopoly on the truth, nor did he assert any special authority for his teaching, neither because of the faith that people had in him, nor because of the apparently logical nature of what he taught. On the contrary, he stated that it is proper to doubt and to test whatever is beyond one's experience. Do not simply believe whatever you are told or whatever has been handed down from past generations or what is common opinion or whatever the scriptures say. Do not accept something as true merely by deduction or inference, or by considering outward appearances, or by partiality for a certain view, or because of its plausibility, or because your teacher tells you it is so. But when you yourselves directly know these principles are unwholesome, blameworthy, condemned by the wise, when adopted and carried out, they lead to harm and suffering, then you should abandon them. And when you yourself directly know these principles are wholesome, blameless, praised by the wise, when adopted and carried out, they lead to welfare and happiness, then you should accept and practice them. The highest authority is one's own experience of truth. Nothing should be accepted on faith alone. We have to examine to see whether it is logical, practical, beneficial. Nor having examined a teaching by means of our reasons, is it sufficient to accept it as true intellectually. If we are to benefit from the truth, we have to experience it directly. Only then can we know that it is really true. The Buddha always emphasized that he taught only what he had experienced by direct knowledge, and he encouraged others to develop such knowledge themselves, to become their own authorities. Each of you make yourself an island, make yourself your refugee. There is no other refugee. Make truth your island, make truth your refugee. There is no other refugee. The only real refugee in life, the only solid ground on which to take a stand, the only authority that can give proper guidance and protection is truth, Dhamma, the law of nature, experienced and verified by oneself. Therefore, in his teaching, the Buddha always gave highest importance to the direct experience of truth. What he had experienced, he explained as clearly as possible so that others might have guidelines with which to work towards their own realization of truth. He said, "The teaching I have presented does not have separate outward and inward versions. Nothing has been kept hidden first of in the feast of the teacher. He had no esoteric doctrine for a chosen few. On the contrary, he wished to make the law of nature known as plainly and as widely as possible so that as many people as possible might benefit from it. Neither was he interested in establishing a sect or a personality cult with himself as its center. The personality of the one who teaches, he maintained, is of minor importance compared to the teaching. His purpose was to show others how to liberate themselves, not to turn them into blind devotees. To a follower who showed excessive veneration for him, he said, "What do you gain by seeing this body, which is subject to corruption? He who sees the Dhamma sees me. He who sees me sees the Dhamma. Devotion towards another person, no matter how saintly, is not sufficient to liberate anyone. There can be no liberation or salvation without direct experience of reality. Therefore, truth has primacy, not the one who speaks it. All respect is due to whoever teaches the truth, but the best way to show that respect is by working to realize the truth oneself." When extravagant honors were paid to him near the end of his life, the Buddha commented, "This is not how an enlightened one is properly honored or shown respect or revered or reverenced or venerated. Rather, it is the monk or nun, the lay male or female follower who steadfastly walks on the path of Dhamma from the first steps to the final goal, who practices Dhamma working in the right way, that honors, respects, reverences, and venerates the enlightened one with the highest respect. What the Buddha taught was a way that each human being can follow. He called this path the Noble Eightfold Path, meaning a practice of eight interrelated paths. It is noble in the sense that anyone who walks on the path is bound to become a noble hearted, saintly person freed from suffering. It is a path of insight into the nature of reality, a path of truth realization. In order to solve our problems, we have to see our situation as it really is. We must learn to recognize superficial, apparent reality and also to penetrate beyond appearances so as to perceive subtler truth, then ultimate truth, and finally to experience the truth of freedom from suffering. Whatever name we choose to give this truth of liberation, whether Nibbana, heaven, or anything else, is unimportant. The important thing is to experience it. The only way to experience truth directly is to look within, to observe oneself. All our lives, we have been accustomed to look outward. We have always been interested in what is happening outside, what others are doing. We have rarely, if ever, tried to examine ourselves, our own mental and physical structure, our own actions, our own reality. Therefore, we remain unknown to ourselves. We do not realize how harmful this ignorance is, how much we remain the slaves of forces within ourselves of which we are unaware. This inner darkness must be dispelled to apprehend the truth. We must gain into our own nature in order to understand the nature of existence. Therefore, the path that the Buddha showed is a path of introspection, of self observation. He said, within this very fathom long body containing the mind with its perceptions, I make known the universe, its origin, its cessation, and the way leading to its cessation. The entire universe and the laws of nature by which it works are to be experienced within oneself. They can only be experienced within oneself. The path is also a path of purification. We investigate the truth about ourselves not out of idle intellectual curiosity, but rather with a definite purpose. By observing ourselves, we become aware for the first time of the conditioned reactions, the prejudices that cloud our mental vision, that hide reality from us and produce suffering. We recognize the accumulated inner tensions that keep us agitated, miserable, and we realize they can be removed. Gradually, we learn how to allow them to dissolve and our mind become pure, peaceful, and happy. The path is a process requiring continual application. Sudden breakthrough may come, but they are result of sustained efforts. It is necessary to work step by step with every step, however, the benefits are immediate. We don't follow the path in the hope of accruing benefits to be enjoyed only in the future, of attaining after death a heaven that is known here only by conjecture. The benefit must be concrete, vivid, personal, experienced here and now. Above all, it is a teaching to be practiced. Simply having faith in the Buddha or his teachings will not help to free us from suffering. Neither will merely intellectual understanding of the path. Both of these are of value only if they inspire us to put the teachings into practice. Only the actual practice of what the Buddha taught will give concrete results and change our lives for the better. The Buddha said, someone may recite much of the texts, but if he does not practice them, such a heedless person is like a herdsman who only counts the cows of others. He does not enjoy the rewards of the life of a truth seeker. Another may be able to recite only a few words from the texts, but if he lives the life of Dhamma, taking steps on the path from its beginning to the goal, then he enjoys the rewards of the life of a truth seeker. The path must be followed, the teaching must be implemented, otherwise, it is a meaningless exercise. It is not necessary to call oneself a Buddhist in order to practice the teaching. Levels are irrelevant. Suffering makes no distinctions but is common to all. Therefore, the remedy to be useful must be equally applicable to all. Neither is the practice reserved only for recluses who are divorced from ordinary life. Certainly, a period must be given in which to devote oneself exclusively to the task of learning how to practice. But having done so, one must apply the teaching in daily life. Someone who forsakes home and worldly responsibilities in order to follow the path has the opportunity to work more intensively, to assimilate the teaching more deeply, and therefore to progress more quickly. On the other hand, someone involved in worldly life, juggling the claims of many different responsibilities, can give only limited time to the practice. But whether homeless or householder, one must apply Dhamma. It is only applied Dhamma that gives results. If this is truly a way from suffering to peace, then as we progress in the practice, we should become more happy in our daily lives, more harmonious, more at peace with ourselves. At the same time, our relations with others should become more peaceful and harmonious. Instead of adding to the tensions of society, we should be able to make a positive contribution that will increase the happiness and welfare of all. To follow the path, we must live the life of Dhamma, of truth, of purity. This is the proper way to implement the teaching. Dhamma, practiced correctly, is the art of living. Questions and answers. Question: you keep referring to the Buddha. Are you teaching Buddhism? SN Goenka: I am not concerned with ism. I teach Dhamma. That is what the Buddha taught. He never taught any ism or sectarian doctrine. He taught something from which people of every background can benefit, an art of living. Remaining in ignorance is harmful for everyone. Developing wisdom is good for everyone. So anyone can practice this technique and find benefit. A Christian will become a good Christian, a Jew will become a good Jew, a Muslim will become a good Muslim, a Hindu will become a good Hindu, a Buddhist will become a good Buddhist. One must become a good human being, otherwise, one can never be a good Christian, a good Jew, a good Muslim, a good Hindu, a good Buddhist. How to become a good human being, that is most important. Question: you talked about conditioning. Isn't this training really a kind of conditioning of the mind, even if a positive one? On the contrary, it is a process of deconditioning. Instead of imposing anything on the mind, it automatically removes unwholesome qualities so that only wholesome positive ones remain. By eliminating negativities, it uncovers the positivity which is the basic nature of a pure mind. But over a period of time, to sit in a particular posture and direct the attention in a certain way is a form of conditioning. If you do it as a game or mechanical rituals, then yes, you condition the mind, but that is a misuse of vipassana. When it is practiced correctly, it enables you to experience truth directly for yourself, and from this experience, naturally, understanding develops, which destroys all previous conditioning. Question: isn't it selfish to forget about the world and just to sit and meditate all day? It would be if this were an end in itself, but it is a means to an end that is not at all selfish. A healthy mind, when your body is sick, you enter a hospital to recover health. You don't go there for your whole life, but simply to regain health, which you will then use in ordinary life. In the same way, you come to a meditation course to gain mental health, which will then use in ordinary life for your good and for the good of others. Question: to remain happy and peaceful even when confronted by the suffering of others, isn't that sheer insensitivity? Being sensitive to the suffering answers. Being sensitive to the suffering of others does not mean that you must become sad yourself. Instead, you should remain calm and balanced so that you can act to alleviate their suffering. If you also become sad, you increase the unhappiness around you. You do not help others, you do not help yourself. Questions: why don't we live in a state of peace? Answer: because wisdom is lacking. A life without wisdom is a life of illusion, which is a state of agitation, of misery. Our first responsibility is to live a healthy, harmonious life, good for ourselves and good for all others. To do so, we must learn to use our faculty of self observation, truth observation. Question: why is it necessary to join a 10-day course to learn the technique? Answer: well, if you could come for longer that you would be better still. But 10 days is the minimum time in which it is possible to grasp the outlines of the technique. Questions: why must we remain within the course site for the 10 days? Answer: because you are here to perform an operation on your mind, and operation must be done in a hospital, in any operating theater, protected from contamination. Here, within the boundaries of the course, you can perform the operation without being disturbed by any outside influence. When the course is over, the operation has ended and you are ready once again to face the world. Questions: does this technique heal the physical body? Answers: yes, as a byproduct, many psychosomatic diseases naturally disappear when mental tensions are dissolved. If the mind is agitated, physical diseases are bound to develop. When the mind becomes calm and pure, automatically they will go away. But if you take the curing of a physical disease as your goal instead of the purification of your mind, you achieve neither one nor the other. I have found that people who join a course with the aim of curing a physical illness, have their attention fixed only on their disease throughout the course. Today, is it better? No, no better. Today, is it improving? No, not at all improving. All the 10 days they waste in this way. But if the intention is simply to purify the mind, then many diseases automatically go away as a result of meditation. Questions: what would you say is the purpose of life? Answer: to come out of misery. A human being has the wonderful ability to go deep inside, observe reality, and come out of suffering. Not to use the ability is to waste one's life. Use it to live a really healthy, happy life. Question: you speak of being overpowered by negativity. How about being overpowered by positivity, for example, by love? Answers: what you call positivity is the real nature of the mind. When the mind is free of conditioning, it is always full of love, pure love, and you feel peaceful and happy. If you remove the negativity, then positivity remains, purity remains. Let the entire world be overwhelmed by this positivity. Story: to walk on the path. In the city of Savatthi in northern India, the Buddha had a large center where people would come to meditate and to listen to his Dhamma talks. Every evening, one young man used to come to hear his discourses. For years, he came to listen to the Buddha but never put any of the teaching into practice. After a few years, one evening, this man came a little early and found the Buddha alone. He approached him and said, "Sir, I have a question that keeps arising in my mind, raising doubts. Oh, there should not be any doubt on the path of Dhamma. Have them clarified. What is your question?" "Sir, for many years now, I have been coming to your meditation center and I have noticed that there are a large number of recluses around you, monks and nuns, and a still larger number of lay people, both men and women. For years, some of them have been coming to you. Some of them, I can see, have certainly reached the final stage. Quite obviously, they are fully liberated. I can also see that others have experienced some change in their lives. They are better than they were before. Although I cannot say that they are fully liberated. But so, I also noticed that a large number of people, including myself, are as they were, or sometimes they are even worse. They have not changed at all, or have not changed for the better. Why should this be so? People come to you, such a great man, fully enlightened, such a powerful, compassionate person. Why don't you use your power and compassion to liberate them all? The Buddha smiled and said, "Young man, where do you live? What is your native place?" "Sir, I live here in Savatthi, this capital city of the state of Kosala." "Yes, but your facial features show that you are not from this part of the country. Where are you from originally?" "Sir, I am from the city of Rajagaha, the capital of the state of Magadha. I came and settled here in Savatthi a few years ago. And have you severed all connections with Rajagaha?" "No, sir, I still have relatives there. I have friends there. I have business there." "Then certainly you must go from Savatthi to Rajagaha quite often." "Yes, sir, many times each year I visit Rajagaha and return to Savatthi. Having travelled and returned so many times on the path from here to Rajagaha, certainly you must know the path very well." "Oh, yes, sir, I know it perfectly. I might almost say that even if I was blindfolded, I could find the path to Rajgaha. So many times have I walked it. And your friends, those who know you well, certainly they must know that you are from Rajgaha and have settled here. They must know that you often visit Rajgaha and return, and that you know the path from here to Rajgaha perfectly. Oh, yes, sir. All those who are close to me know that I often go to Rajgaha and that I know the path perfectly. Then it must happen that some of them come to you and ask you to explain to them the path from here to Rajgaha. Do you hide anything or do you explain the path to them clearly? What is there to hide, sir? I explain it to them as clearly as I can. You start walking towards the east and then head towards Banaras and continue onward until you reach Gaya and then Rajgaha. I explain it very plainly to them, sir. Then it must happen that some of them come to you and ask you to explain the path of Rajgaha. Do you hide anything or do you explain the path to them clearly? What is there to hide, sir? I explain to them as clearly as I can. You start walking towards it, and then these people to whom you give such clear explanation, do all of them reach Rajgaha? How can that be, sir? Those who walk the entire path its end, only they can and they will reach Rajgaha. This is what I want to explain to you, young man. People keep coming to me knowing that this is someone who has walked the path from here to Nibbana and so knows it perfectly. They come to me and ask what is the path to Nibbana, to liberation, and what is there to hide. I explain it to them clearly. This is the path. If somebody just nods his head and says, well said, a very good path, but I won't take a step on it, a wonderful path, but I won't take the trouble to walk over it, then how can such a person reach the final goal? I do not carry anyone on my shoulders to take him to the final goal. Nobody can carry anyone else on his shoulders to the final goal. At most, with love and compassion, one can say, well, this is the path and this is how I have walked on it. You also work, you also walk, and you will reach the final goal. But each person has to walk themselves and himself has to take every step on the path himself. He who has taken one step on the path is one step nearer the goal. He who has taken 100 steps is 100 steps nearer the goal. He who has taken all the steps on the path has reached the final goal. You have to walk on the path yourself.